What is up, internet? I'm TheNiceOne, and today we're talking about character texturing. This time, I'm going to explain to you how I would texture a character in 4 main steps, and we're going to use that orc model that we built in last week's video as an example. So sit back, relax, and let me make the mistakes for you. So, texturing in 4 steps. Basically, the 4 steps breaks down into this. Step 1, create the UV map. Step 2, create the AO maps. Step 3, colorize. Step 4, make your material. So step 1, creating the UV map. If you don't already know, a UV map is basically a flat layout of your 3D model. Imagine that you had a box and you marked seams along the edges of the box so that if you were to cut it, it would lay flat on the ground. That's what a UV map is. So, when we're making UV maps for my character, what I like to do is create seams along the major body parts of your guy. So for example, if your character is a humanoid, I would make seams along his thigh, his calf, his arm, his forearm, his torso, his head, so that I could unwrap it into body pieces on the map. In order to do that, I'll go into edge mode, and while in edge mode, I'll highlight a particular loop on my model, hit Ctrl E, go to edge data, and then inside edge data, you'll mark seam. And if you do that properly, the seam that you highlighted will actually turn red, indicating that it's now a seam that can be unwrapped. And when you're unwrapping a cylindrical shape, make sure you have a connecting seam between the 2 seams at the ends of the cylinder, so that when you unwrap the object, it unwraps like a scroll instead of flattening out. So step 2, creating your AO maps. AO maps are called ambient occlusion maps, and basically what they are is the subtle shading that you see at areas that are overlapping each other. So for example, on a person, when your arms are down, right around your armpits, there's obviously going to be some natural shading because your forearm and your body are aligned with each other, creating that darkness. That's what an AO map is doing. It's creating those shadows at the creases of a body part where shadows are to be expected based on your scene's ambient lighting settings, which is basically just a soft lighting all around. Now, basically the way we create an AO map is that we're going to use the UV maps that we created in the previous step to create a new AO map image. The way we do that is by going into the render settings and going down to the bake panel. Under bake, you should be able to select ambient occlusion as one of the bake settings. Hit bake and Blender itself will create a new ambient occlusion image that you can use as an AO map. If your AO maps come off a little pixelated, a little too blurry than you want, one of 2 things happened. Either you're baking your image at too low of a resolution, so for example 1080 by 1080, when in reality it should be 496 by 496, 4K, or even 8K if you can do it, or your sample rates are a little too low, which you can bump up in the world settings. Step 3, colorize. So there's 2 ways we can really do this. You can either use Photoshop as a way of combining the UV map and the AO map and then coloring the maps that way on a 2D plane, or you can use Blender's texture painting mode and paint your character directly on the model. Imagine as if you're actually painting a 3D object in front of you in real life. For this example, I used the Photoshop approach. So what I did was I took the UV map that we exported earlier and I took the AO map that we created after that and brought those 2 images into Photoshop. Because those 2 images were created at the same size, I layered them on top of each other and then hit multiply so that they would overlay nicely, but you'd still be able to see the detail of both when you were looking at them as one. From there, I proceeded to add flat color at particular body sections of my UV/AO map. Once I had the base color set up, I pretty much just went back in and added a few little highlights, a couple of little shadows to give it a little nice detail. Once I was done colorizing in Photoshop, I saved the file as a PSD file and kept it in my links folder, which we're going to be using later in step 4. So step 4, making a material. So something we have to understand is that there's a difference between a material and a texture in Blender. Materials are great for when you want to use the cycles renderer, while textures are used for the Blender renderer or the game renderer. Most of the time people use materials because they like the cycles render because of how it interacts with light, but depending on how you want your final model to be used, you might end up using the Blender renderer because the flat shading is enough for you. Now, how do we create a material? Select the model that you want to create a material for, and then open a node editor view. In the node editor view, if you have not created a material yet, there should be nothing there. Hit use nodes, and 2 nodes will be generated automatically for you. The first is an output node, and the second is a diffuse shader, which basically indicates how light will interact with the material you're going to apply to that shader. In order to apply the texture that we had created in step 3, hit add at the bottom panel or shift A. In the options you have available, go to texture and then hit image texture. And the new node should be generated in the node editor view. In that node, select the image that you had created earlier, whatever you had named it, whether it's a Photoshop file, a JPEG, or a PNG. Just select it in the panel. Once you have the texture selected, use the pick whip, the yellow pick whip, and connect it to the diffuse shader so that the diffuse shader knows what to apply the diffuse light onto, and that the output knows what the texture image is going to be. Once you've done that and you're in Cycles Renderer, boom, hit render, and your character should have the texture that you had created for him. Now you can go in and add a little more detail, like some shadows, some highlights where you want, but that's pretty much the basic steps to creating a texture material for your character. So remember, the 4 main steps when you're texturing your character: create a UV map, create the AO map for shadows, colorize so that you have a texture, and then make a material out of the images that you've produced. Anyways guys, I hope you liked this video. Hopefully now you have the basic steps that you need to take in order to create your own crazy materials and your own crazy textures and characters. Remember, once you have the basics set up, start experimenting and see what you like different shaders, different style, different texturing styles, maybe use a different image instead of actually just painting color. Just experiment and see where it takes you. But if you have any comments, just drop a comment below and I'll let you know if I can answer your question. Stick around for my next video where I'll come out with another character that you guys might like. But until then, I hope you liked the video. I'll talk to you later. Have a nice night.